Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Matt, and welcome to week 11 of the Language Learning Mastermind group. I'm excited to share some of my progress with language learning and, of course, talk about language learning in general. And before I get started, just want to let you know that there's probably only going to be one video out next week. It's going to be a big one, though, but just kind of wanted to throw that out there. There might be more than one video. I'm not really sure right now, but like I said, there will probably be a pretty big video coming out next week. So just keep that in mind. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So I wanted to start off the week and talk about some of my Russian progress, and it went really well. I'm already at my 7 hour total, and I changed things up quite a bit. I mentioned that in last week's video, and I think that some of the changes that I did were really helpful. So the first thing that I think is kind of just noteworthy is I started reading, in Russian, basically some very simple stuff. And it was a little bit difficult at times, but I did get some reading in, which was really, really awesome. And I also just kind of mixed up my vocabulary review process just a little bit. I was just doing a little bit more frequent reviews throughout the entire day. I just made sure I was very focused during my vocabulary times, and I think it was very helpful overall in the end of the day. And then, of course, I worked on some of the other items like listening and grammar, but overall, some of the changes that I did last week I think were very helpful. And I think this just kind of goes to show that sometimes you got to mix things up. Sometimes you got to look at what you're doing and see if you can make it a little bit more effective, a little bit more fun, a little bit more compelling, and just go from there. And so I kind of took a look last week, as I mentioned, and I've kind of adopted and put some of those changes into action, and I think it's really helping out so far. So, talking about each of the areas just a little bit. So, vocabulary. It went really well, and I implemented a lot of the changes that I talked about last week into just my learning this week. And so, on the vocabulary front, it was a lot more just frequent reviewing of the words that I've been struggling with, just because there's that big difference between English and Russian. I was a lot more focused during my vocabulary kind of study times. And of course, I also started reading, which I think is a great way to to learn words in a foreign language. So all those kind of things combined, I think, were made for a very successful vocabulary week. I was very happy with the progress, and I kind of want to continue with these items just into the next week and just kind of keep expanding them as I go on. In terms of the other areas, listening went really well. I put a lot more time into it this week, and I'm definitely learning, or I'm definitely noticing that the words that I've been learning are popping up in listening content more and more. I'm noticing even more words from last week and last month and et cetera. And I think that's super awesome, right? I did not expect listening to progress as quickly as it has been. Now, granted, it's still very difficult, but the amount of words that I am noticing in audio content is increasing every week, which is really great. So I'm just keeping that up, kind of doing listening when I'm multitasking, doing other activities, but that's progressing very nicely. Grammar is also kind of just continuing along. I'm trying to just kind of get some of these main high value grammar items into my memory just so that it can kind of help with the reading process or just learning in general. And it is a little bit difficult at times just because there's so many rules with Russian. There's just so many exceptions to the endings, for example, in the present tense. But slowly but surely, I'm getting more familiar with it. I am just learning kind of these endings. We're just being more familiar with it as time goes on, and that's just going to be a process. So at times, it's a little bit of a struggle, just because Russian grammar can be very complicated, but that's progressing quite nicely. And then kind of the last item was reading, and so I started reading in Russian, and it's going really well. Like I said, it's a little bit difficult at times. I'm still quite the beginner at Russian, but it is kind of this other vocabulary method to kind of help you to just pick up words and also see grammar and context. And I think that it's going really well, right? We're going to see how it progresses just over the coming weeks. But it's just I'm just trying to read. It's a little bit of a struggle at first. It's a little bit new to me, but it's going very well. So I don't really have much to report on the reading front, at least as Russian is concerned. But it's progressing nicely, and it's just kind of this other bucket that I can pull from to be learning the language with. So I'm really happy with that. And so kind of overall, I'm really happy with this week. I changed a couple of things up. just to be a little bit more efficient. And I think that overall it was successful. Of the changes that I've implemented, I think were overall very good changes, and we'll see how they kind of develop over the coming weeks. But I think this is also kind of just a really good insight into the fact that even if you change your methods up, even if you optimize your learning or make it 5% better or 10% better, it's still going to take time, right? It's going to take time to really see some of those gains in your language learning. It's going to take a couple of weeks to really see the impact of that method change that you do or of that new focus that you have for the language learning process. It takes really time to kind of see that momentum and get those results. And I did get results this past week over last week, right, with some of these changes. But I do know that over the coming weeks, that's really where it's really going to build. And at the same time, too, even if you do kind of some of these strategy changes or optimizations, um, it's not going to be just this dramatic difference maker where you change your strategy up for 1 week and you're fluent the next, right? It's gradual improvement, and that gradual improvement will pay off in the long term, right? There's no kind of quick fix to get to fluency like immediately. So I think that's just important to stress that these kind of improvements that we do in our language learning or optimizations or what have you really have a significant impact over the long term, but you just have to kind of trust that process and keep observing it just to make sure that it makes sense going forward, etc. So overall, language learning went really well this week. I'm very happy with the results, and I'm excited to see what kind of comes into the coming weeks. So for today's topic, I wanted to talk about language learning fundamentals. And obviously there's the kind of thing that I think that most people think about when it comes to fundamentals, right? Like vocabulary, speaking, things like that. But what I wanted to talk about is kind of fundamentals a little bit on a deeper level than that. And it's just something like along the lines of discipline or being able to think critically, those kind of fundamentals, which if you work on them and get really good at them, it'll make your language learning better, right? And it's not exclusive to language learning itself. You can apply kind of these ideas to other skills out there, but I think it's really important to think about these ideas to try to improve them for yourself, because overall, with any skill, and in particular language learning, if you work on these kind of ideas, these really core fundamentals, you will see more progress with your language learning. You'll have more fun because really your progress in language learning is very much influenced by these fundamental concepts. And so, just to talk about the first idea that I had in mind, this kind of first fundamental concept, and that's discipline. And discipline is something that is really important, and ultimately, I think, is what carries you to getting to a high skill level, right? Once we've kind of taken care of motivation, right, where that you want to learn the language, after that point, it really kind of comes down to discipline, right? You have to put in the time into the language learning process. You have to do those things that you don't want to do, or you just have to be consistent with your language learning, right? And there's going to be days where you're motivated and not motivated. So that discipline, that kind of fundamental idea there, is going to carry you, to a high skill level in a language, right? Now, I think when people think about discipline, they think kind of this very negative idea. It's very aggressive. But the way I think about discipline is just, having that habit of doing what you need to do in the language learning process, right? Of just being consistent in your learning, right? Always be learning, still kind of trying to hit your goals, even if you're tired or you're just not in the mood. And discipline, I think, is just very important, right? Because you have to get those hours in to reach a high skill level. And there's really just no way around it. And so, what is the thing that's going to get you there? Well, it's going to be discipline, right? Obviously, there's some things like motivation that you want to try to get as high as possible. You want to make sure you're having fun methods and effective methods. But once you kind of optimize the method, once you've kind of ensured that you're trying to have as much fun as possible, that you have that motivation, that remaining part is the discipline aspect of things. So it's very important to have it. It's not something that you necessarily have to think about actively, right? I think in some cases we just have it or we don't, or maybe more people are driven or have more discipline. But if you're just kind of aware of this concept in the back of your mind, I think it can help you, right? Because by working on discipline, by working on getting more consistent to ensure that you meet your goal targets or whatever it is, I think you ultimately will kind of progress a little bit quicker, right? Things will be easier because that discipline will be working for you, right? I think it's a mistake to think about discipline as this very negative thing, or this just kind of very stressful thing. Ultimately, it's there to kind of help you to make more progress in language learning. So when we talk about these fundamental aspect of things, I think discipline is a very core aspect. Try to work on your discipline, right? Try to work on being consistent in your language learning to meet your goals, to set goals, to just always be doing language learning every day, every week, right? It doesn't have to be the super intense, stressful kind of idea, but working on this kind of fundamental idea of discipline can be very helpful in the end of the day. So I think another fundamental idea is just being able to kind of critically think and just think about things, right? Analyzing a situation and trying to find improvements to your language learning, or what's going right and what's going wrong, right? So I think it's skill in itself where you can kind of just observe, hey, am I losing motivation here, right? And not just identifying that you're losing motivation, but trying to think critically about how you can come up with solutions, right? Or what do you need to seek out in order to kind of get help to get motivation, right? Or maybe the methods that you're using, you're realizing that they're becoming less effective, maybe they're becoming less fun, and so you've identified that problem, and then now you're trying to seek solutions to fix it, right? To kind of come up with better methods or more effective methods, or if you don't kind of know what to do, seek out resources or information that's going to help you, right? And it seems very obvious, but it's something just once again to think in the back of our mind. Sometimes it's very easy to go on autopilot mode with language learning and just kind of think that the app that we're using or the program or whatever it is just going to take us there, take us to fluency, take us to that high skill level, and we just don't have to think about things. And sometimes, you just got to be able to critically think about things and just kind of adjust accordingly, right? Because even though you might have a guided program with an app or a book or something like that, only you can really tell, and be honest with yourself about, how effective it really is for you, right? Or how motivated you are, right? The app can't kind of determine if you don't have motivation anymore or you're getting bored. I mean, maybe you can kind of infer that through some of the statistics on the app where your numbers are going down or something like that. But ultimately, you kind of have to analyze that and observe that. And I think that it's important to just kind of have this skill, or just to once again always try to be reflecting, think about things, and just look at ways you can improve, right? So when you see yourself falling off, ask yourself those questions. Okay, why am I losing motivation right now? Is it something that I can control, right? What can I do differently, right? How can I come up with better methods, right? Maybe you're very frustrated about your progress. Just trying to think about, ways to make it more effective, or at least seek that information out. I think that's an important kind of idea, right? Because I think that sometimes you just have to look at your own individual situation, right? There's some good general advice out there about how to learn words quicker or how to get better at speaking, right? But sometimes, that advice, whether it's on YouTube or articles or whatever it is, isn't helpful for you in the moment. And so sometimes the best thing to do is just to, forget about the advice out there, the information, and think for yourself. Think about what's going to be the most impactful for you, and try some things out. So it's something that just takes time and I think experience. But I think just being aware of this idea of just reflecting to think about how you can improve things is very important. And it's a good fundamental thing to just keep in the back of your mind as you go about learning a language. And then another kind of critical skill that I think is very important is just to kind of always try to be optimized, right? Try to work smart, not just work hard or, a lot of hours, but just work smart with your language learning, right? So, if, for example, you have downtime, right? Maybe you're just kind of waiting, for something for 5 minutes, right? Rather than just kind of having that be dead time, pull out some vocabulary and learn some vocabulary in that time where you're really not doing anything, or kind of multitask, right? If you're going to go work out, you're going to go cook or clean, put on some language learning audio content, or occasionally look at some grammar or vocabulary kind of in between some of these small breaks. Maybe it's just you kind of observe that the way that you're learning vocabulary is not very effective, and so you're going to work smarter and kind of pick a different strategy that's going to help you to learn better. Maybe you identify, oh, I don't really work the best in the mornings. I work way better in the evenings with my language learning, I kind of retain a lot more. And so rather than kind of forcing yourself to study in the mornings, you kind of switch to working in the evening, right? That's working smarter because for that same 30 minutes of time in the language learning process, right? If you're absorbing more in the evening, if you're feeling more comfortable in that time versus the morning, right? Even though it's the same time investment, that same 30 minutes, you're going to get more out of it kind of in this example by, doing language learning at night. So I think another thing is to work smart with language learning. It's not just about putting in the time, right? That's obviously very important, and just kind of putting in that energy into language learning, but it's also about working smart, right? It's about picking the best methods that are going to help you to progress quicker, right? To pick those times where you're going to be operating the best in your language learning process, right? So I think there's, like I said, there's so many angles you can look at this kind of subject from, but I think it's also important to try to work smart with your language learning, right? Look at new ways to do things more effective, and work smart with your language learning. It's kind of this fundamental idea that ultimately I think will help you to progress quicker, have more fun, and just get more results in the end of the day. And so that's just a couple of kind of fundamental ideas that you can apply to your language learning, right? Or just to think about in the back of your mind, right? Sometimes these things are hard to work on, whether it's just kind of self-analysis, reflection, or discipline, or it's just going to take a while to get better at discipline or some of these fundamental ideas. But I think that the first step is just to think about them ever so often, to keep them in the back of your mind, and try to improve them when you can, because ultimately I think these kind of these core fundamental ideas are going to help you in your language learning, right? They contribute to your overall success and progress. So it's worth thinking about them, right? Sometimes I think it's very easy to want to focus in on, the method, right? Or something along those lines. But sometimes it's really kind of coming down to improving our discipline or something along those lines. So, like I said, there's a lot of different kind of fundamental ideas out there that you could work on. I just talked about a couple of them, but I think that once again, it's just it can be very helpful to think about them ever so often because, in my opinion, they do contribute to your overall success in language learning. And if you do focus on discipline, just reflecting a little bit more, things like that, I think that you'll see some benefit. So now I wanted to transition into our weekly reflection and ask you, how did your week go with language learning? What went right and what went wrong? I think, as I say kind of every week, it's really important to reflect on your language learning, to kind of ask yourself, what did you do right? What were some big victories that you had and what didn't go so well? And I think it's important just to kind of allocate a little bit of time to it, come up with some kind of methods and strategies to apply moving forward, but then leave the reflecting at that, right? Sometimes it's very easy to just over reflect, to over analyze, and want to keep changing our methods, to doubt ourselves, and just kind of be analyzing way too much. I think it's good to just kind of have this time where you analyze, you just kind of reflect a little bit to see if you're still on track or if there's some things you can keep doing. And but then once you finish that process, continue on with what you're doing, right? With whatever skill you're trying to improve or what have you, and in our case, language learning. So once again, I think it's important not to kind of overanalyze things too much or just do it too frequently, but just a quick reflection every week or ever so often, I think can be very helpful in the end of the day. And I think for some people, they might kind of struggle with this idea, right? They don't really know what to reflect about or kind of how to analyze things. And so just to kind of give you some ideas on what to kind of just think about was, first off, just start with a positive, right? What were three things or five things, or let's just, could be any number of things that you did right this week, right? What were some victories? Just kind of to build that confidence, to kind of, to just reassure you that you indeed are making progress and you're doing certain things right? I think it's important to kind of keep our confidence up and to keep that positivity moving forward in the language learning process. And then also kind of think of three things that maybe didn't go so well, right? Maybe things that you could have done better, that you missed a goal or two, that you can kind of try to work on next week or over the coming weeks. So, obviously, once we've kind of identified some of the things that we have been struggling with, we can just kind of ask ourselves, okay, well, why did we fail here, right? Was it because we were losing motivation? Maybe it was just a very busy week. Maybe there's nothing really to think about there, and we're just going to do better next week, the next day, the next month, etc. But sometimes, it just reflecting or analyzing about the situation just a little bit, we can kind of maybe realize that the method we're using isn't very effective anymore. And so maybe we should try out a new kind of strategy for the coming week, or we'll approach things a little bit differently. So when you kind of identified some three things that you could work on for the coming week, just ask yourself, hey, is there anything I can do to make that better, or is there any kind of problem there that I should try to change so I can be more effective in my language learning over the long term. And then a couple of other areas that you can kind of just think about in terms of just what you've been doing right or what you've been doing wrong is just think about the core aspects of language learning, right? Like, ask yourself, how is vocabulary going? How is speaking progress? How are you doing in the listening part of things? What about grammar? And you don't have to tackle every single area, but it's just a way to kind of think about, what you're doing right or what you're doing wrong or where you can improve, right? Just think about these core areas, right? Where the core things that you're doing every week, right? Just ask yourself, okay, how is the app that you're using working out for you? How is your vocabulary progress, your grammar progress? How is your goal towards using fun and compelling content in a language learning process, right? Is the grammar method that you're using effective? Is the vocabulary method that you're using fun? Just think about those kind of core aspects of the language learning process in terms of what you're doing right for the week, or what you could improve on. And I think if you kind of approach your reflection and kind of analyzing what you can do better in that way, it'll be very helpful and a lot easier and more streamlined. So, if you're struggling with that kind of reflection process, I would consider just trying to tackle it in that way. It might be very helpful. And like I said, you don't have to invest, like I've said in the past, you don't have to invest too much time into this, right? Just 5 or 10 minutes just to see if we can get some small efficiency improvements for the coming week. And that's what I had for the week. So let me know what you think. If you're open to it, leave a comment below and tell me how your language learning is going. What is your plan for the new week and the coming weeks ahead? What are you struggling with? What are you doing right? I think it can be very helpful to share some of those comments with others so they can also kind of learn from your own experience. Don't overlook that. And with all that being said, I will see you all in the next video. Take care.